In order to web the press, the first thing you need to do is find the correct size of substrate that your job requires. Then slide the roll of substrate onto the unwind cylinder. Make sure the roll of substrate is positioned as far over to the left as possible. Once that is done, take the air hose and apply pressure to the air receptacle, like those found on bicycle tires. This will inflate the cylinder so that the substrate is on securely. Bring the wheel arm down and pull the substrate over the first two rollers. Pull the substrate back underneath, feeding it around the next roller and down. Feed the substrate underneath the two rolls and up, making sure the substrate remains in front of the air nozzle indicated in red. This concludes the webbing of the unwind station. For clarification, refer to the diagram as shown. Next, you will learn how to web a print station. Now feed the substrate over top of the first roller on the print station. From there, bring the substrate up between the two rollers as shown. Next, thread the substrate between the uppermost cylinder and the nip roll. Only the first and last stations are equipped with nip rolls. These are used to create tension across the web. From the other side, bring the substrate around the cylinder and then feed it behind the metal support. Using both hands, retrieve the substrate so that it can be brought around the lower impression cylinder and upwards between the metal guard and heater as shown. Continue to pull the substrate upwards, and then over the roller at the top and down into the heater. Once the substrate emerges from the heater, pull it down and around the roller. From here, the steps can be repeated for any remaining stations. This concludes the webbing of the print station. For clarification, refer to the diagram as shown. Next, you will learn how to web the die cut and rewind station. Bring the substrate up from the last station, over the two anvil cylinders and through the two bars on the tension control. Continue threading the substrate straight through the nip roll and the cylinder as shown. If there is a previous job, you need to remove the roll from the rewind cylinder. In order to do this, you need to deflate the cylinder by using the air hose and gently applying pressure to the air receptacle. You should hear the air release and then you can slide off the roll. Slide an empty core onto the rewind cylinder and align the substrate with the core. Using a label from a previous run or tape, attach the substrate to the core as shown. Next, use the air hose to inflate the cylinder to secure the core. Now you will learn how to set up the die cutter. First, you must slide a very thin washer on the gear side journal of the die cutter. Next, you must also slide a bearing block on, making sure the thinner side as indicated faces the gear. Now pick up the die cutter and place it into the channel, orienting the gear away from you so it aligns with the gears on the press. Because the die is sharp, special handling gloves are used. Washers need to be added to the journal closest to you to prevent the die from moving back and forth. This number is not exact, so trial and error is required. Once you have found the correct number of washers, the bearing block should slide and lock into place, preventing the die from moving. Like the die cutter, the bearing blocks are placed onto the die hold-down assembly facing inwards. Then lower the assembly into the channel on top of the die cutter. Now Now fasten the bridges with thumb bolts, making sure the pressure screw is not applying pressure to the bearing block. Repeat this for the opposite side. Note the notch in the analox roll and the corresponding notch in the press. Insert the analox roll into the press, making sure to align the notches together till the analox roll snugly slides into place. Next, take the analox roll end cap and screw it into the press as shown, securing the analox roll in place. You may need to lift up the analox roll so that it is level while doing this. Now slide the fountain roll back into the channel below the analox roll as shown. The two blocks on either side of the fountain roll, which have grooves so that it can slide into the press, should be oriented so that the long side is facing you when installed. Next, put thumb screws onto the bolts beside the channel for the fountain roll. Then place the bridges onto the bolts and tighten the screws so that they hold the bridges in place. Repeat this step for the other side. Now place a stopper in the disposable fountain, plugging the hole. Insert the fountain into the press, making sure it is underneath the fountain roll. The axle of the fountain roll should fit into the cutout semicircle areas on the fountain. Now insert the fountain rods from the right side, securing the fountain in place, making sure the other end of the rods go into the holes on the other side of the press. On the plate rod, make sure the indicator is in the center. You can do this by adjusting the knob as shown. Next, refer to the chart posted on the press to figure out which holes the plate cylinders should be mounted on. This will depend on how many teeth your plate cylinders have. Insert the plate rod partway into the correct hole on the press, and then place the first lock onto the rod, making sure it sticks out at the top between the guard and the heater. Next, slide the plate roll onto the plate rod, followed by the second lock on the other side. Next, turn the plate rod lock adjustment so that the small circular piece of metal at the end fits into the hole above or below it, like shown. Once it slides all the way through, you will need to turn it counterclockwise so that it retracts towards you and becomes tight against the wall of the press. This will ensure that the rod is locked in place. Next, you will have to align the plate cylinder's gear to the center of the gear on the press as shown. Now make sure that the lock closest to the gear is flush with the plate roll and then tighten it. Repeat this for the other lock, making sure it is also flush against the plate cylinder and prevents it from moving back and forth. Lastly, turn the plate pressure knobs clockwise to lower the plate roll's gear to the press's gear until they are engaged.